before us, especially when racism is so powerful today, when people tend to judge each other by their height or their hair texture or their skin color, by superficial parts of their body, when that's not the real human being. The real human being is that spirit, that essence that lies within the physical body. And another name for the soul is a nafs. And there are many debates amongst philosophers and scholars concerning this word, a nafs, that you'll see appearing in the Quran in many different places. And it is used for different purposes, but the majority of the scholars, the strongest of the scholars in the sharih of the Aqidah Tahawiyah, which is a very famous book of Aqidah or Islamic faith, they explained that the soul and the nafs are really one. It is one entity. And that when the soul is attached to the body, that generally speaking, the word nafs is used because the soul is now attached to the body. And so there is a nafs, there is a person, there is that animate object. But when the soul leaves the body, then you don't see nafs being used, you see ruh, especially being used when the soul leaves the body. And so the strongest position is that the nafs and the soul...
Well, tonight we're here on the Underground Railroad. Shalom, peace to you. And we have our guest. I'm going to let him introduce himself, and then we're going to get into some interesting conversations.
Thank you, brother. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to present Blacktown.net. In the 1990s, I had an epiphany. Here in Chicago, I asked myself, where is our town? You go on the north side, they have Chinatown, okay, over there on Cermak. You go on the north side, they got Bucktown and Old Town and New Town, Greek Town. Matter of fact, we're in Greek Town right now, people.
That's correct.
We're in Greek Town. Where's Blacktown? Now, I was blessed to be able to find and found Blacktown.net on the internet. Yet, why am I the only one who's thought about this? See, we got to start thinking big. Black men. It's 2013, and we're going to have some real intense talk tonight. We're going to talk about a lot of things, and among the things is black manhood. The Million Man March was 17 years ago. Now, that was powerful. That's in the history books. It was beautiful. But we're in Chicago, and Chicago is making headline news right now because of the violence. And of course, July 4th, it was reported 70 people were shot. Now, you know, July 4th is supposed to be a day where we celebrate and commemorate the independence of America, breaking away from the British Empire and founding the United States Constitution and the principles of the Constitution. Yet this black on black violence erupted and culminated with 70 people being shot and about what, 12 killed maybe?
17.
17 people killed. Now, they recently, matter of fact, yesterday, I was at the State of Emergency summit that our three congressmen held over at Chicago State. So, you know, I'm glad that people are finally starting to realize that we in the black community have got to get to the bottom of a lot of our problems. And like I said, I had the epiphany. Where is Blacktown? Where is our town? Now, real strange, show you how God works. This is before we found out about Black Wall Street, before Black Wall Street became popular, and Rosewood in Florida. Mm-hmm. And they made a movie about Rosewood. And I was like, okay. Because at first people used to say to me, there's no white town. I was like, yeah, maybe you're right, maybe, you know, whatever. But then, like I said, come to find out, when we came out of slavery, we had all of these skills. Black people, we knew how to build things. So we had these towns. What happened to Black Wall Street? It was destroyed by the racist whites, the Ku Klux Klan. Destroyed. Black Wall Street. Rosewood in Florida was destroyed.
Drop bombs on them.
Yeah, and this is, of course, was before we had this technology to document. And this violence against blacks existed and all the way up till the 1960s, when modern technology was able to document overt racism, the overt racism that blacks have had to endure before this technology was invented to document overt racism. And of course, you said that we later eventually talk about Trayvon Martin, another example of overt racism. Just surreal, absolutely surreal what happened to Trayvon.
But wouldn't you say that part of our problem is that what we want to do all the time is march, but we don't have no program to affect the economics of those people who do things against us. You know, I've always been a believer. If they were in Montgomery, Alabama, sure, they boycotted the buses, but that wasn't what got them what they wanted.
Come on.
They stopped doing business with them.
Yeah, economics.
It's economics. People, they don't respect anybody marching. They could care less. They'll probably say, let them so-called Negroes, so-called African Americans, so-called blacks, let them go on and march. 6 months from now, they'll forget about it. But if you started talking about we're not going to buy nothing from these stores and be consistent with it, you'll get their attention. I believe it was Frederick Douglass, and to correct me if I'm wrong. He said, without force, you have no power.
Yeah. There are so many lessons that we can learn, particularly from the era that you're describing, the 1960s civil rights desegregation era, in which part of our crusade was to demonstrate and exercise our constitutional right to protest and to assemble. And of course, that was just part of one aspect of an ongoing effort during what I call the glorious 1960s, because quite frankly, in the 1960s, black people were doing everything right, because eventually, push did come to shove as a result of the continuing overt racism of the Ku Klux Klan, when they, number one, bombed the 16th Street Baptist Church and killed those 4 little black girls. Medgar Evers was killed. Emmett Till was killed. And then, a lot of people don't know this, members of the Nation of Islam were killed out there in California.
Yes, they were.
Yes, they were. And that's what pissed Malcolm X off. A lot of people don't know the history. And that's black people's biggest problem. You don't know your history. Malcolm said he wanted to fight.
Malcolm said that history rewards all research.
You've got to know your history. It was Malcolm X who taught us about the house slave and the field slave. And yes, Malcolm loved his teacher. We love that history.
There was one other slave, and that was, you had the house Negro, the field Negro, and then you had one other slave. That was the runaway.
You had the runaway. Thank you. You know your history.
Yes, I do.
The runaway didn't want to have nothing to do with none of it.
He didn't want to be in the house.
He didn't want to be in the house.
And he didn't want to be in the field.
In the field. He wanted a Blacktown.
He wanted to be free.
He wanted to be a free man. Mm-hmm. And see, this is the game that we've been in, and thank God you know your history, because you'd be amazed at how black people, we don't know enough of our history, and that's for a lot of different reasons. One of the reasons we were enslaved was because we're not a violent people, and we can, in a way, take pride in that. Although, ironically and paradoxically, we are the best fighters in the world.
Well, Hitler said, if you had left your dogs at home, I would have won the war. So we are the best fighters.
No doubt about it. Fastest reflexes, yet we love peace. We come from a climate in Africa that was conducive to peace. When you look at Africa, you don't see barriers, barricades, fences, fortresses. There were a lot of tribes. We all got along. We're rhythmic people. We like music. And now the world is realizing, after the rise of Hitler and the invention of the turbine jet engine, which we now see is contributing to global warming, and of course the splitting of the atom and the atomic bomb, that war is dangerous.
Well,
And that, let me say this, the lesson that we have to learn is that you have to work at peace. You have to plan peace with the same amount of energy and effort that you plan war.
well, you know, Henry Ford wrote a book, 2 volumes, called The International Jew.
Mm-hmm.
And in that book, he said, nothing just happens.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure I want to get your opinion on this. He said, everything is planned. In 1948, the federal government in the United States Congress said they were going to develop thinks all across this country for us. And the thinks would allow more moral turpitude and everything to go on in that area, to keep it from being spread in other areas where there were people who were, I'll call them Albions, or white people, all right? And it's actually an actual law that was put in 1948. And that's when they decided they were going to build high rises and everything to concentrate everything in those areas and have sections of the city, of cities, that was going to allow that kind of moritude. And if you go back in time, you find that to be true. But we wasn't doing nothing economic about business. Sure, they sold dope. And finally, they said, this is our method. We can destroy them by letting them use and sell dope, which is causing most of the problems with our young men today. It's not because they don't like each other. They think that that is business, when it's not business. If you can organize a whole group of people to sell narcotics, then you have enough brains to organize and set up a legitimate business and have those same young men working in a legitimate business. What do you have to say about that?
Well, you've said a lot, and it like I said, and like you said, black people, we've got to learn this history. See, history is really is almost a new exact science because of this technology. And going back to the 1960s, and quite frankly, the last 100 years is the most documented history in the history of history. Think about it. So we should be, when we have these kind of forums and these discussions, what lessons have we learned? One of the things that I've noticed, a lot of things that white people do to us that we think is racism, it's not really racism, because white people have a long history of violence among themselves.
Well, I don't disagree.
I mean, you take some of the movies. Take the movie The Godfather. Take the movie, another popular movie about a gangster. What was Al Capone? Not Al Capone. Al Pacino. Scarface. Mm-hmm. You take that movie. These rags to riches stories of how they start out as gangsters.
End up being businessmen.
They end up being businessmen. Now, the black gangs have never been allowed to become businessmen.
When they started,
and that's the racism. That's the double standard.
When they started to do that, the so-called leadership,
Mm-hmm.
they put them in the penitentiary.
Yeah, it's a game.
When they started moving in that direction and away from the other stuff.
It's a game.
You know, I spent X amount of years working with street gangs.
Yeah, it's a game.
In a streets program.
Yeah.
And I learned a great deal that I didn't know.
Yeah.
You know, for example, in Woodlawn, there was a old man back in 1898, gave the University of Chicago $1 billion that was to be put into a trust. Mm-hmm. And they couldn't get any of the money until they owned all the land the University of Chicago originally owned when they started. Now you understand why they helped to have not the El Rukins, but the Blackstone Rangers doing stuff that would decimate the community and make people move and etc. because they were after getting the land. As Malcolm said, land is the basis of all power.
Well, like we were saying earlier during the break, blacks excel at sports, and no one debates that. But most people, they don't understand why black men excel at sports. They will say because black men are strong. And it's a history question that I always ask people, okay? Blacks excel at sports because that was the only area in American society where a black man could be treated fairly or be given, or should I say, given credit for his effort, for his work, for his rehearsal, for his practice. In other areas of American society, black men have been cheated. And now it's culminated right now, 2013, with the controversy of Trayvon Martin and that insanity. I mean, I just absolutely knew George Zimmerman would be found guilty based on the evidence.
No, he wasn't going to ever be found guilty.
Well, you're one of the people, when I hear people say that.
I told him before the trial.
Well, that is surreal to me because it defies logic.
Because of the 1724 black codes. You should read them.
Yeah, I do recall. And of course, see, that is what's called, when it defies hatred to, when it defies logic to that extent, hatred. That is what it is, and it's real funny. I haven't heard that, but...
So they were written to maintain white supremacy.
Well, yeah, and now for those who have not been studying their history, they have been given a very, very, very good example
Part of
what blacks have had to endure since slavery was ended, supposedly, in 1865 as a result of the Civil War. But now we see all of the young people, all of the immigrants who come to America, and they look at the black community and they point the finger at black people, and they don't know what we have endured, but they got a big dose of it when we look at how Trayvon Martin, a young black man who was only trying to bond with his father, something that all of these black boys out here need to do. They need to bond with their father. But now we see they've got to fight against these forces that don't want us to bond. They don't want us to build, even like we were just saying. The boys out here, they cannot. That's one of the reasons there's so much violence in Chicago, because all of these gangs have splintered. And we know they do that even in military. They don't want some of these foreign countries. They don't want one established central, what they call a centralized office, a central government. They want splinter groups.
Well, I'm going to just tell the truth. Whether it was a young man at that time known as Minister Rico, that was with the Vice Lords. There was Malik, known as Jeff Ford.
Uh-oh.
Then there was Larry Hoover.
Uh-oh, those names ring a bell.
All right. Sure, there was killing. But having worked with street gangs, all right, I knew things other people didn't know. For example, if you were a stone, you couldn't have a gun with any bullets in it unless you were going to do something they told you to do. If you had one, then you had a problem. All right? When they set up the El Rukin Circle of Seven, grassroots independent political organization, I told them, you all going into the penitentiary. All right? Why? Because Mayor Daley and them had the hamburgers. All right? Street gang.
Wow. Wow.
That Mayor Richard M. Daley is the president of now.
Uh-oh.
And they only let 100 members in at any point in time.
Wow. That's some history.
And they took over the Cook County Democratic Party.
Uh-oh.
And they saw that potential, so they said, oh no, we know what we did. We're not going to allow this. Because they have the one thing we had, the foot soldiers, to do that.
Well, you know, that is a beautiful history, and you were obviously there, here in Chicago, and I look at it different ways, and of course, historically speaking, we know that whites had gangs. We know that. We know that. And like we said earlier, their gangs started out doing nefarious things, but then they became legitimate.
I can give you an example.
They became legitimate businessmen and politicians, etc.
There's certain politicians in this town who are key politicians. You know, when I was doing that street gang work, all right, there was a young man named Russell Holtz. He's in the federal penitentiary right now in New Mexico. But Russell, we used to talk, and he would tell me all these white politicians that he used to give orders to because they were all members of the Gaylords that started on 55th and Ashland. And I'm talking about that new group on the north side. I said, him? He said, yeah. Tell him you know me. When I became an alderman, I went to each one and said, you know, Russell told me to tell you hello. And
Well,
they were shocked. But he said what we did, we decided we were going to go into the insurance business, all right? We were going to go into politics because that way, the stuff we were doing that was crooked, we didn't have to do no more. Because if we went in the insurance business, everything had to be insured by the agency that we set up in our communities.
well, you
And
know,
that's business.
yeah.
That's not extortion. You're going to get that insurance from somebody, right? So
Right.
since we're in this community and we got an insurance agency, you're going to get it from us.
Yeah, well, that's, you know, when we look at what blacks have had to endure, we've always had to do things by the book. And even though we may not be given credit, because we still get cheated, we've always had the rug pulled from up under our feet. We've never been given the red carpet treatment. But I think that is analogous. And I use the biblical analogy of, you all remember the biblical story of when Moses went and entered into negotiations with Pharaoh.
I remember it very well.
Moses went into negotiations with Pharaoh, and Pharaoh was stubborn. And to teach Moses a lesson, one of the things that Pharaoh decreed, he told them slaves, let me see you make bricks without straw. Let me see you make bricks without straw. And that is what black people have had to endure. We've always had to deal with double and triple standards. And in many times, in many ways, we've excelled. We beat the odds. And we could attribute it.
One of the things
We could attribute it to being miracles.
One of the things I want to ask you about, because what you said is true. What about this National Guard stuff?
Well, the National Guard, and I spoke with the sister, Monique Davis. And I told her, I said, sister, you should be calling on black men. These boys need men. Do you know, and I asked her, historically speaking, do you know what the National Guard does? You don't summon the National Guard to help people across the street, little old ladies across the street. When we look at when the National Guard was summoned, 1968 Democratic National Convention?
67.
Daley told them, you shoot to kill. Out there in Kent State, they shot and they killed. You don't call the National Guard. What we need is men. That's what we need. And why don't black women just tell black men and remind black men? You went to the Million Man March 17 years ago, coincidentally, the same year that Trayvon Martin was born, coincidentally. And black men took a vow, an oath, a pledge, and a promise. That's what she should be saying. That's what she should get on TV and say. You don't call no National Guard to come and kill your babies, your boys, your brothers, your fathers. And that's a part of a pattern where, quite frankly, black women have been taught and trained. You don't call on black men. He's not an authority. You call on everybody but who God intended to come and to love you, because that's what we need. We need a bunch of love. And the National Guard are not going to come with no love.
But you know, I'm a follower of the Noble Drew Ali. And Noble Drew Ali always taught, we as a people, we must have love, truth, peace, we'll get freedom, and we'll get justice. and we have forgotten how to love each other.
Well, let me say this, because there's a lot of science, and all people, all civilizations go through a period where the scientists have to emerge. Religion is fine, but at some point you have to understand cause and effect. We're still trying to make bricks without straw. And yes, we've gotten through some deserts, we've gotten across the Red Sea, but we are at the River Jordan. We have got to decide, what are we going to do? Trayvon Martin was a sign. It's no coincidence that he was born in what? February, Black History Month. He was killed in February, Black History Month. He was killed February 26th, Savior's Day. Huh? He was born in 1995, the same year as the Million Man March.
Well, you know, I agree with you, and I want to say this to you. Honorable Elijah Muhammad said there's three things that destroy us: envy, jealousy, and stool pigeons.
Well, guess what? All civilizations have to go through that. See, at some point, we're going to have to go through what all people go through. See, a lot of people don't realize white people fight white people. Some of the things they do to us, it's not racism. Let's not ever forget that white people fight white people. World War I was white on white. World War II was white on white. The American Civil War to end slavery was white on white. The Mexican-American War, all kinds of wars. America was founded because white people did not get along in Europe.
We're getting to the end. We got about 30 seconds to go. We've had a very, I'll say, extremely good program. We just needed more time. So I'm going to give you the last word.
Well, this is just part one. Because, like I said, the Million Man March, we all saw it. President Obama is a beautiful, intelligent black man, but he's not the only intelligent black man. We have to govern our affairs.
Well, one thing I'll say, and we'll get ready to close, and that is those black men in Chicago, and I went to the Million Man March, and I came back to do what I said.
What you're doing, beautiful.
All right?
Beautiful.
However, those others who are not doing anything need to go on and admit that they went there and lied.
Well, we can give them credit, but I'll say this, they got to do more.
And the nafs has three major names. The first is an-nafs al-ammara bis-su. And you find this in Surah to Yusuf, verse 53, Inna nafsa la'ammaratun bis-su'i illa ma rahima rabbi. That surely the soul commands evil, except that which Allah has mercy on, my Lord has mercy upon. And so this is called an-nafs al-ammara bis-su. That's your evil side. It calls you to evil things. Then there is an-nafs al-lawwama. And that you find in Surah Al-Qiyamah, verse 2. وَلَا أُقْسِمُ بِالنَّفْسِ اللَّوَّامَةِ. And do not make oaths with this soul that gives you advice. So nafs al-lawwama helps you to do good. It advises you to do good inside of your life. The third name is an-nafs al-mutma'innah. And this comes in Surah Al-Fajr, as many of you have memorized, in verse 27. Ya ayyatuha an-nafs al-mutma'innah irji'i ila rabbiki radiyatan mardiya fadkhuli fi ibadi wadkhuli jannati. This is memorized by our whole community. O you soul in complete rest and satisfaction, return to your Lord well pleased and well pleasing. Enter you then among my honored slaves and enter into paradise. And so the nafs and the ruh are actually one. It is that force